and we'll continue to let people in as they come. So David Mallory, it's all yours.
Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate that. There's one other person you need to know who is on the call this evening. That is Bailey Smith. You see her little box. Wave your hand, Bailey. There, Bailey is the current Commission on Ministry chair. And so from time to time, as I go through our conversation tonight, she may chime in with some things. And so I just want you to be aware that she is currently the chair. And so she'll have some things to add as we go through it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for carving out an hour of your Monday night to learn more about the Commission on Ministry. As I was thinking about how to approach our conversation tonight, I had an encounter with my 4-year-old grandson, Henry, that helped clarify how I would address this talk this evening. I was over at my daughter's house with the kids, and Henry was quieter than he's supposed to be, because he is usually quite noisy and quite active, but he was very quiet. And so I grew suspicious. And so from the other room, I shouted out, "Henry, are you playing with your dad's camera again?" And there was a moment of silence, and all I heard was, "What?" And then I said, "Henry, the camera, you were told not to play with it." And then a moment of silence, and he said, "Who?" I said, "Henry, your father, he doesn't want you playing with the camera." A moment of silence, he said, "Why?" And so I thought, what a perfect segue into what we need to talk about. What, who, and why. All right. So that is kind of the crux of what we're going to do tonight, the who, what, and why of the Regional Commission on Ministry. Why do we have it? What do they do? And who are they? So there'll be some time, I think, at the end for questions, but I know that when presenters always tell me that, I always forget my questions by the time I get to the end. So if you have questions before that, in the midst of what we're doing, wave your hand, jump up and down, interrupt me, do whatever you want, or even type it in the chat box. I have my chat box up, and so I'll try to keep an eye on that. So feel free, if a question hits you, to jump right in. Then there will be some time for questions at the end also, for us to have some further conversation, but feel free to join in at any time. So here we go. I wanted to start with the why. Why do we have Commission on Ministry? And that's going to require us to do a little background work and a little biblical study and a little bit of historical study. So I want to start in Scripture with the book of Acts, chapter 13. Now, in the church at Antioch, there were prophets and teachers: Barnabas, Simeon, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, a member of the court of Herod the ruler, and Saul. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I've called them." Then after fasting and praying, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. And so you see, even in the beginning, as the church was in formation, the early church recognized that there was a need for leadership and that these leaders would be set apart. Now, the challenge is, what does that mean? Set apart. And that is the crux of what the Commission on Ministry has done. That really is the crux of many, many church fights over the years. What does it mean to be set apart? Well, in the early days of the Stone Campbell movement, this set apart was something very foundational. If you'll remember, the Stone Campbells were from the Presbyterian Church. And in the Presbyterian Church, the presbytery was responsible for setting apart. But Stone and Campbell didn't particularly care for that. They were concerned about the presbytery had too much power over the local congregation. Campbell, in particular, was adamant about congregational autonomy. But Campbell was also adamant about the New Testament model of church that included 3 offices: evangelist, deacon, and elders. Now, the evangelists, their work was out in the field, bringing people to Christ. The deacons, their work was in the church, taking care of the day-to-day operations. But the elders in the early church were the spiritual leaders, the spiritual teachers. Campbell said the body of elders were those who were set apart. to be leaders in the church. And so the elders, actually the spiritual leaders, the teachers, actually came from the membership of the church. But then as the churches began to grow, this became problematic. You see, the elders found out that they had fields to plow, they had crops to get to the market, they had children to raise, and in the midst of all of their own personal obligations, the flock was being neglected. And so what happened was many of these churches began to hire elders. And so as this practice of hiring elders became more accepted and abiding in that principle of congregational autonomy, individual congregations began to hire their own clergy. Now there's a caveat here. And it's a very, very important one. I think one that we often forget. The hiring of elders was not meant to replace the priesthood of all believers. Campbell was very adamant that he believed everyone was involved in the ministry of the church. But Campbell also said that these paid clergy, these paid elders, they were to engage in representative ministry. That is a very, very important term in Disciples of Christ. The paid clergy are to represent Christ to the church and to the world. Now, as these early churches began to hire ministers, the criteria for those ministers primarily was that these were graduates of disciples' institutions of higher learning, of which by this time there were many, many of them. Places like Bethany College, Lynchburg College, Transylvania University, and one we have down the street here that is today Barton College, that then was known as Atlantic Christian College. So in the early days of the disciple movement, nearly all of the paid clergy were those who had come from a disciple institution of higher learning. But as time moved on, there were more churches than there were graduates. And so non-disciple educated clergy began to seek employment in disciple churches. Unfortunately, the local congregation didn't do, in many cases, a very good job of vetting those individuals. And that's where the problems really began to arise. Now I want to jump across history a little bit to 1960. If you'll remember your disciples' history, at this time, the church was in the midst of restructure. We were trying to kind of understand who we were as church. In preparation for that, the General Assembly commissioned a panel of scholars to explore our theology and our practices. These were ministers, professors, theologians, leaders in the church who gathered together to talk about and research and explore who we were as church. And together, this group wrote a 3-volume set that is known as the Report of the Panel of Scholars, and covering all facets of the church. I just happen to have a set of the Panel of Scholars report from 1960. If sometime you are having trouble sleeping and insomnia is setting in, if you'll let me know, I'm happy to lend that to you, and it'll put you right out, I promise you. But it was an important time for the church, an important exploration. There was a gentleman by the name of Ray Lindley, who was the president of TCU. And he was tasked with researching and writing about the structure of the church. Now, Lindley spoke of Campbell's passion for church independence, but also within that, he recognized that there was a tension between independence and affiliation. And here's what he wrote. Lindley wrote this. He said, Campbell no sooner had sowed the wind of a loose autonomy than he began to reap the whirlwind of a rampant individualism. Entire congregations were led into error and factionalism by ministers who gloried in their own irresponsibility. So you see what was happening, don't you? These churches were hiring ministers who were more interested in their own good than they were in promoting the gospel. And the churches were crumbling underneath the leadership of this misguided clergy. Well, that practice of poor vetting of clergy in disciple churches really came to head in the early 1960s. There's a gentleman by the name of Ross Case. He was a member of a very growing and dynamic independent congregation in Indianapolis, Indiana. This was a church that was very passionate about social justice and racial reconciliation. It was a very diverse congregation, but they were struggling, not necessarily in growth, but they were struggling to gain any sense of public recognition, of public acknowledgement, of public affirmation. And so they felt like to be validated as ministry, what they needed to do is have some sort of denominational affiliation. Well, Case had grown up in the disciple church, and he knew the disciple church embraced those same principles of social justice and racial reconciliation. And so he went to the pastor of this growing church, and he encouraged this gentleman to explore the possibility of being in relationship with the disciples of Christ. So this minister did that, and he liked what he saw. He loved the disciple passion for racial justice. He loved their emphasis on communion and on the table as the center of worship. But what he liked most of all, was their hands-off approach to the local congregation. So this congregation ultimately applied and became affiliated with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and became a member of the Disciples denomination. Now, you may know the name of that church. It's the People's Temple. And the minister of that church, who was given standing by the disciples of Christ without any vetting or any oversight, that gentleman's name was Jim Jones. And history tells us the rest of that story doesn't. And even though efforts to establish some standards for ministry have been going on for many years, the Jim Jones incident really created a new urgency and a new significance in the way that the church was going to credential their clergy. To really help the churches be fruitful and faithful to the gospel, we began to realize how important it was to have leaders who are properly equipped, properly focused, properly credentialed, and who don't have their own personal agenda. The process at hand was not working, so new systems began to be put into place that would provide credentialing for those persons who were felt called to ministry. Now, to maintain some level of localism, this responsibility was given back to the regions instead of to the general church. And thus, today, we have a regional commission on ministry. It is a checks and balance that is set to help vet those persons who feel they are set apart to be in ministry. So that's the why. Any questions or comments or thoughts before we move forward? You guys are far too easy.
That was a great
Okay.
summary. It's just too
Thanks.
thorough.
Thanks. All right, let's explore the what. So in trying to answer the why question, we've already looked at part of the what question. The Commission on Ministry is charged with the vetting of individuals who feel that they're set apart to be clergy in the church. We're gonna break that down and talk more about that in detail in a minute. But I think it's important to recognize that that is not the only task of the Commission on Ministry. There are many things that the Commission on Ministry does. For instance, one of the what do they do, the what's of the Commission on Ministry, is to provide education for the clergy in the region. We need to better equip people for ministry, particularly those that are non-seminary trained. And the reality of it is, we are seeing more and more persons who feel called to ministry who are not seminary trained. They want to serve the church. They want to serve the gospel. The church wants them to serve, but they haven't been properly equipped. They don't have the tools for ministry they need to be successful. as our churches begin to get smaller, this is even more important because a smaller church can't necessarily afford a seminary trained or a full-time clergy person. And so many times these are part-time individuals or retired individuals who want to serve the church but don't have that seminary background. So where do they get that? The Commission on Ministry helps provide some venues of education to help them do that. Now, quite honestly, in North Carolina, we have struggled to get this done. We have made many efforts and not always turned out the best. The primary way that we've had it done over the few years has been the Lay Academy. Some of you may be familiar with the Lay Academy. Some of you may have attended the Lay Academy. The Lay Academy was sort of a series of classes that would be held usually on a Saturday at various locations that might be taught by a minister or by a professor from Barton or from a variety of individuals. There wasn't really a kind of a set out curriculum per se, but there were a series of classes that people could take, and once they graduated, they would get a Lay Academy certificate. That worked pretty well for a number of years, and I think, a lot of people went through the Lay Academy and got some good education. Probably the last 6 or 8 or 10 years, the participation in Lay Academy has dropped off significantly to the point that we really were not having much participation at all. And it's kind of gone by the wayside at this point. We have tried providing some workshops, some online, some in person, some success with some of those. But again, it's been kind of hit and miss and not very structured. We do have boundaries training and racial equity training that are required of clergy every 5 years. And we've really done a good job of getting that in place and structuring that. We need to provide more of those. And we're trying to do that. But that is one curriculum I think we have done pretty well with. We've had some conversations with Barton College on entering a partnership to provide some sort of education venue and education curriculum for ministers. And that conversation's been ongoing. Quite honestly, we need to do more and we want to do more. But we've struggled for resources. And let's call it what it is. We've struggled for money. It costs money to put these things on, and we just don't have the funding for it. So education, I think, is an area that the Commission on Ministry has really wanted to improve in, and we've struggled to do that. But it is part of the task of the what of the Commission on Ministry. Another thing on the what of the Commission on Ministry is to support and nurture the ministers in the region. Ministry can be very difficult, can be very isolating, especially if you're in a rural area in a small congregation and you're the solo pastor. It can be very, very isolating. And so to have a group of individuals who have so-called have your back, that can be very, very affirming and comforting. So sometimes when the Commission on Ministry meets with clergy persons, sometimes we just sit and listen. We don't do anything but just listen to them and let them vent. And we provide for them a safe space so that they can vent and talk and just kind of sort through things. And so that nurture is a very important component. We have a mentoring program where we take a new clergy person and partner them with a more seasoned clergy person that will kind of help them and be an ear for them and be an advisor for them and be a help for them. And so that mentoring is part of that support and nurture. A number of individual members of the Commission on Ministry might meet periodically with a clergy person in their geographic area and just have lunch or have coffee and just check in and say, how are you doing? And that's a venue for support, a venue for nurture. And so I think the Commission on Ministry over the last few years has really tried to enhance our efforts at being a place of support and a safe place for clergy persons. And so I think that's a very important component of what the Commission on Ministry does. Now, we can't be so naive to think that there are not situations of clergy misconduct, because there are. And one of the whats of the Commission on Ministry is the policing aspect. It is not the fun part. And it does not happen very often. But if there is a issue of misconduct, sexual misconduct, financial misconduct, institutional misconduct, and the congregation needs help to work through that, that falls back to the Commission on Ministry, particularly if we have to deal with credentialing. And the Commission on Ministry does have the power to remove a person's credentials. That does not remove their ordination. That removes their standing. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. That removal can be temporary, or that removal can be permanent. If the transgressions are great enough, that can be permanent. Thank heavens, in my many years on the Commission on Ministry, we have had to deal with this very few times, but it is a reality. And it is part of the responsibility of the Commission on Ministry, the policing of it. Now, let's get into this creature we call standing, okay? If you need a hip replacement and you want to go to an orthopedic doctor, you want to know that before that person cuts on you, that they have the appropriate training to do the job. Are they credentialed? Do they have the qualifications? Do they meet the established standards? I mean, we do this for doctors. We do it for teachers. We do it for lawyers. We do it for veterinarians. We do it for our plumbers. Why would we not do it for our clergy? The Commission on Ministry is responsible for this, for the credentialing of clergy. We call it standing, but a personal bias, I don't like that term because I think it's confusing. So I tend to use the term credentialing because I think people understand that better. So as I go through this, you're going to hear me use those terms synonymously, standing and credentialing. Now, for a person to be credentialed through the North Carolina Commission on Ministry, every single candidate, hear me again, every single candidate has to do at least three things. Number one, they have to be a member of a disciple church. You would think that's evident. I mean, that's obvious, but you would be surprised how many people we have come to us and want us to give them standing, and they're not even going to a disciple church. So they must be a member of a disciple church. They must have a church, a disciple church to sponsor them. No one gets credentialed by the Commission on Ministry. The Commission on Ministry vets the credentialing, but it's the local congregation's sponsorship that ordains that credentialing. Campbell was adamant about that. The local congregation has autonomous control. The Commission on Ministry is there just to support that credentialing. Number three, every candidate, hear me again, every candidate has a background check. All right? How many companies hire their employees without a background check? Very few. And yet churches do it all the time. We hire staff and we don't do any background check. If they are credentialed through the Regional Commission on Ministry, they are required to have a background check. All right, member of a disciple church, church must sponsor them. They have to have a background check. Those three are required. So this credentialing affirms that this person has met all the necessary requirements to perform ministry in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Now, in the regional design, standing must be renewed annually. Let me hear that again, annually. In North Carolina, over the last probably 15 or 20 years, this has been neglected. And the last 2 or 3 years, we have tried to reinstate this process of annual standing. And quite honestly, we've had some pushback against it. Standing is not meant to question your calling. It is not meant to challenge your theology. It is not meant to strip your ordination. It is a relationship tool. It is the part of the covenant between the church and the region and the clergy person. It is very, very important. Now, I'm currently helping out serving as the standing clerk. Hear me say that. I'm the standing clerk. I do the administrative part. I don't make the decisions. If there is a standing application that comes to me that does not meet all the criteria, I turn that to the Commission on Ministry for review. I don't make those decisions. I just administer it. But we strongly encourage every clergy person in North Carolina to fill out a standing form. Now, if you didn't do one for 2023, don't go do it tomorrow and send it to me. We're not going to process it. We process them in the fall of the year every year. If you're a clergy person and seeking standing, those forms are distributed usually about mid-August to be returned in September, and then you receive your card sometime in December validating your standing. We're doing that every single year. Things that are reviewed as a part of your credentialing. Your contact information. Have you moved? Do you have a new phone number? Do you have a new email? Do we need to update our files? Where are you? Have you in a different church? Have you recently retired? What's your role of ministry? Are you up to date with your continuing education? Have you been to your boundaries training? Have you done your racial equity? Those are the kind of things we look at. Now, for the continuing education, at this point, we've been very lenient on that because we realize that people are behind in trying to get those, and we have not provided enough avenues for people to get all that training. So we've got some catching up to do on that. But it's still important to track that. And so we want people to have their boundaries every 5 years and their racial equity every 5 years. All right. So standing is important. Okay, David, but I'm a person, I don't have standing. How do I attain standing initially? Two methods: ordination or commissioning. Now let's look at commissioning first. Commissioning, we used to call it licensed ministry, but it's been changed to say commissioned ministry now, which is interesting because licensed ministry has a long history in the Stone Campbell movement. Martin Stone was actually licensed to preach in the Orange Presbytery of North Carolina. Alexander Campbell was licensed to preach at the Brush Run Meeting House in Pennsylvania. And so even Stone and Campbell had licensed ministry at one point in time. In 1948, the disciples established the office of licensed minister, but its goal was for lay members who were desiring to serve as part-time clergy. Again, this was primarily for smaller churches who couldn't afford full-time clergy, who couldn't afford seminary-trained clergy, but needed a pastor and had a lay member who wanted to do it, but wanted some credentialing for them. And so this office of licensed minister was created. The last few years, we've changed it to commission to minister, and we've sort of expanded it to people who may be called to a specific ministry. For instance, you may be commissioned to do youth ministry. You may be commissioned to do music ministry, or you may be commissioned to do new church starts, or you may be commissioned to serve in a nonprofit. And so it's not just commissioned as a senior minister in a church. It's commissioned to a variety of things. So this commissioning has a variety of different arms that you can be commissioned to. Now, this is very important, very important. If you don't get anything out of our time together, please understand this. Commissioning is for a specific role in a specific setting for a specific time period. Let me say that again. Commissioning is for a specific role in a specific setting for a specific time period. So you may be commissioned to work with youth at First Christian Church in Wilson, but then you move to Greensboro and you want to work with the youth there. You have to be recommissioned to First Christian Church Greensboro. That commissioning is not portable. It is to a specific setting and a specific role for a specific time period. All right, how do I become commissioned? Well, remember, we have 3 criteria. Must be a member of Disciple Church, must have a church to sponsor you, and must have a background check. In addition to that, that church that is sponsoring you, that you are serving, must have a job description that describes your arena of ministry. Because remember, you are commissioned to a specific role in a specific setting for a specific time period. So if you're going to be the youth minister at the First Christian Church in Wilson, they need to have a job description that describes what you're going to do. This not only protects them, this protects you. And so as a commission minister, the Commission on Ministry will expect a job description. All right. In addition to that, you would need to complete an application form. Those can be found online at the regional website. You will meet with the Commission on Ministry for guidance, for review, for support, for affirmation, but you will meet with them. You will be commissioned for a specific time period. Again, specific role, specific setting, specific time period. Typically, as a new commission minister, that time period would be 1 year. As people stay in the process for longer, their renewal for commissioning may be extended to 2 years or maybe even longer. If you have a change in location or a change in ministry, you have to reapply. Commissioning is not portable. Once you are commissioned, then you have standing. Once you are commissioned, then you have standing. And then you have to reapply for standing every year. All right? That's commissioning. Let's move to ordination. Okay? Now, to be an ordained minister in the Disciple of Christ Church, you have to do 3 things. Here we go again. Must be a member of Disciple Church, must have a church sponsor you as a candidate for ordination, and must complete a background check. Those have to be done. To be an ordained minister, there are 2 avenues for ordination. Number 1, there's the seminary tract. Bishop Melvin calls this the gold standard. It is a Master of Divinity degree, not a Master of Theological Studies, a Master of Divinity degree from a seminary that is accredited by the Association of Theological Schools. Let me say that again. A Master's of Divinity degree from a seminary accredited by the Association of Theological Schools. So that degree that you got from Uncle Bill's Bible College won't work any more than a medical degree from Sally's doctor school. It has to be an MDiv from a school accredited by the Association of Theological Schools. Persons on the seminary track, as they're in seminary, will meet periodically with the commission, and the commission will monitor their progress and kind of help support them along the journey. They will also write a number of papers. They'll explain their theology, they'll explain their practices, their calling, they'll explore all kinds of things, and the commission will walk through them with that. Upon completion of their seminary education and completion of all of the requirements that the commission has given to them, the commission will validate their candidacy, and an ordination service will be held in the local congregation. That's important. Candidates cannot be ordained without local congregation sponsorship. So ordination services take place in the local church. Even, hear me now, even if they are not intending to be a local church pastor. If they're going into chaplaincy, if they're going into nonprofit work, whatever it may be, they're ordained in a local church because that church sponsors them. That is the root of authority, the local congregation. Now, different from commissioning, ordination is portable. My sponsoring church for ordination is the First Christian Church of Tyler, Texas. But obviously, I'm not in Tyler, Texas anymore. But my ordination is portable. So it's recognized all throughout the country. Okay? That's the seminary tract. That's a great question, Michelle. Michelle's question is, why don't we ordain MTS or MPS if those degrees are better fits with the new forms of church. That is something that is being explored. In fact, I am on a committee right now that through the general church is looking at rewriting our criteria for ordination. We're currently still, MDiv is the gold standard because that's been the gold standard forever. And that's what the policies say. I think there's a likelihood that some of that may change, but we're playing with the cards that we're dealt right now. And so the MDiv is the standard at this moment. Going forward, I would not be surprised to see that change at some point in time. And your point's well taken, because there are different forms of ministry that something else would fit better than an MDiv.
Yeah, and I would say just one note about the MDiv. It's a really unique degree because it's almost 2-in-1. So it's typically a lot longer. It's an 80 or 90 hour credit program, which is about 3 full-time years. And it's also got this blend of the practical, the practice, the preaching, the pastoral care, the liturgy piece, as well as your academic study.
Right.
And so, if that transition is made to recognize MTS and other higher educational theological degrees, the next question is, okay, how do we help ensure that our ministers have a well-rounded skill set and understanding of the things relevant to what their work is? So if it's kind of a nonprofit track, what does a well-rounded set of skills look like for that? If it's, an alternative track or hospital chaplaincy, what's a relevant skill set? So there's kind of those multiple layers to the MDiv degree that do kind of call it out a little differently than those other degrees, I would say.
Quite honestly, Michelle, that's one of these we're struggling with on this committee that I'm on, is because there are so many new forms of ministry. What is the best training ground for those new forms of ministry? And how do we, in writing policies and procedures as GCOM and RCOM, how do we set standards so that we can attain that? And so it's going to be a struggle, but your question is well taken. And that is something I think that the church is wrestling with right now.
Right.
And Michelle, I'd say that with an MDiv and ordination in the disciples, but also I'm working in a nonprofit full-time,
Right.
utilizing very different skill sets. So, it is an interesting thing to think about. What are the skills and what are the
Okay, so we'll take your name off of the
parts
road.
connected to our calling
We'll
and our
contact
Okay, let's look at the apprentice track, because remember there were 2 tracks to ordination: the MDiv, the seminary track, and the apprentice track. For some people who want ordination, seminary degree is not possible. Their life situation doesn't allow it. Their finances don't allow it. Their geographics don't allow it. For some people, it's just not possible. And so the church has tried to come up with an alternative track to ordination so that those persons can work towards that goal of ordination. And this is called the apprentice track. Persons on the apprentice track must demonstrate competencies in 16 categories of ministry. And I'm going to read those to you. These are the 16 categories of ministry: Bible knowledge, church administration, communication, anti-racism, ecumenism, Christian ed, ethics, evangelism, mission of church in the world, pastoral care, preaching, spiritual development, stewardship, worship, general theology, disciples of Christ, history, and heritage. Now, of those 16 categories of ministry, the candidate has to show competency in each one of those. Well, how do you show competency? Well, it comes in many forms. It can come through classes you have taken, through seminars you have taken, or it can come through experience in one particular arena. And so when a person comes on the apprentice track, the Commission on Ministry will sit down with that candidate and take the big chart, we call it the big chart, that has those 16 competencies on it, and will write with the candidate each training ground that they've had that apply to those various categories of ministry. And then we'll do an assessment to say, okay, wow, you've got really good training here in church administration, but maybe you need to do some work in stewardship. Or you've had a lot of involvement in worship, but maybe you need to take a class in disciple history and polity. And so we'll try to work with them to make sure that they have covered all of the 16 categories of ministry and that they have a working competency in those. Now, it's subjective, okay? It is subjective. You may think if you read a book by Fred Craddock on preaching that you're good to go preach. Well, the Commission on Ministry may not see it that way. And so they may invite you to do some other things. So it's a kind of it's a give and take. And so the commission will meet with candidates and try to work through them to find a pathway that the commission can feel confident that they have adequate training, so that when they get to the end, that they get the tools that they need to be fully ordained at that point. And it can be a long process. And so it takes a great deal of work and a great deal of time and a great deal of patience. It can be a long process. But once you get to the end, the apprentice track, you're approved for ordination, you're ordained in the disciples' church, and you have standing. And as having standing, then that is subject to renewal every year. Okay? So, commissioned, you have standing, subject to renewal. Ordained minister, seminary track, you have standing, subject to renewal every year. Apprentice track, ordained, you have standing, subject to renewal every year. Okay? Follow the process. Standing is something that is renewed annually. Okay.
I'll jump in real quick, David, and share one update with the commission this year. Standing, like David has shared, standing is usually held with a regional body. So he mentioned his original ordination was in Texas, and he had standing at that time in Texas. His ordination is portable, but upon moving to another region, he has to make sure he's following whatever the disciples' church and the disciples' region in the new region, whatever their standards are for standing. So we have a new
established
letter.
standing in the new region.
Yes. And so we have a new letter that the commission has put together to really welcome disciples ministers that are transferring here into North Carolina. There's, sometimes it can be difficult. Who do you call? What's the right protocol? So we've got a new letter, and it accomplishes 3 things. It welcomes the new minister to the region, lets them know where to plug in to get information. We want them to know that we're happy they're here, that we're happy that God has brought them here and is bringing their skill sets and their spirit to our region. It provides them the process to transition their standing. So the process to connect with Bishop Melvin and to get the right information to the regional office to connect the dots there. And then it also lays out, as David's mentioned, that annual standing process. So they're not surprised when they get some letter in the fall that says you've got to take these classes. So it makes sure that they know what to do now and then what to do to maintain standing here in North Carolina. So if you hear about a minister that is a disciples minister that's moving to our region, feel free to connect them with me or with Bishop Melvin, and we'll make sure that they get this letter and know what the next steps are. We're pretty excited to welcome a good handful of ministers in over the last year that have come from other regions. So it's a joy to share in that with them.
Thank you, Bailey. All right, one last venue to be able to establish standing. What if you are ordained in the Episcopalian Church, ordained in the Methodist Church, ordained in the Presbyterian Church, and you want to become a disciple? We are seeing more and more clergy transferring in disciples from other denominations. And this can get very, very complicated. Now, a disciple church, again, local autonomy, a disciple church, you can hire a Baptist minister, you can hire a Methodist minister, you can hire an Episcopalian minister. Whether they have standing or not, you have local autonomy, you can hire them. But we strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that that individual come before the Commission on Ministry for their credentialing. Okay? Now, why? For the very reason I've told you over and over again. Those 3 things that are required of every candidate: member of a disciple church, sponsored by a disciple congregation, and a background check. Okay, we do that on every single person. In addition, Persons transferring from other denominations will send us a list of references, and we will go through and check those references in detail. Another thing we will require of those transferring from other denominations, we will require them to take a disciples history and polity course. That is so, so important. If you have a person coming, serving your church that is ordained Episcopalian, they understand Episcopalian polity. They don't understand disciple polity, okay? And so they're going to be confused. They're not going to know what to do. It's going to create problems. They need to be trained in disciple polity. And so part of that transfer process is we will expect them to take a history and polity class. And LTS and CTS and Phillips, many of those are online courses that can be taken, and they're very, very helpful and productive. We will also assess their ordination and seminary training. Do they have the MDiv, that is the gold standard for disciples? Is their seminary an accredited seminary? They will also meet with the Commission on Ministry for conversation and dialogue. And if they meet all the criteria, then that ordination from another denomination will be recognized and affirmed in the disciple. And then that person will have standing in the region and will be subject to annual renewal. All right. So we went a long way in talking about what? So standing, ordination, commissioning, licensing, the vetting of candidates is an important part, but there are other parts too, and we covered those earlier. Now we're getting close to the end of our time, so I saved the easy part for last. The who is the easy part, all right? So we'll cover that very quickly, and if there are any questions, we'll open it up for conversation. Who is the Commission on Ministry? Well, per our regional design, the Commission on Ministry in North Carolina is made up of 12 members, each serving 4-year terms, 6 clergy, 6 lay people. That's very important. Again, priesthood of all believers, that was Campbell. Campbell said the lay people have to have a voice. And so in North Carolina, 6 lay members serve on the Commission on Ministry as well as 6 clergy. These members, all of the members rotate 3 rotate off every year so that there's continuity. 9 are staying on, 3 are rotating off. There's continuity. They are elected by the regional assembly, with the chair being appointed by the regional minister and the regional moderator. Nominations, for persons to serve on the Commission on Ministry come from a variety of places. They come from local churches. They come from conversation. They come from other ministers. They come from just about anywhere. You can nominate yourself. If you feel called to serve on the Commission on Ministry, you can certainly call Bailey Smith and put your name in the nomination, or Skipper McLaurin, and we will consider you for the Commission on Ministry. Bishop Melvin, the regional minister, serves as ex officio of the Commission on Ministry. In building the team for the Commission on Ministry, we are very sensitive to gender, very sensitive to race, very sensitive to geographics, very sensitive to age. We are a diverse region, and we try to populate the Commission on Ministry with a diverse population so that it can reflect the churches in our region. And so we try very intentional with who the members are on the Commission on Ministry. The Commission on Ministry meets every other month. Okay, so 6 times a year. Pre-COVID, we always met in person. COVID obviously forced us to meet Zoom, and so for a couple of years we didn't do anything but Zoom. And I think now it's kind of a hybrid, part in Zoom and part in person. But we really like to meet in person when we can, but sometimes geographics don't allow that. So that's the who, that's the easy part. The last thing I'll say before I open it up for question or comments is, when I first came to the region many, many years ago, I got a sense that the Commission on Ministry was an adversarial relationship with the ministers in the region. And we've worked very, very hard to try to change that. It's not meant to be adversarial at all. The Commission on Ministry is meant to be supportive and relational. Remember, I said that earlier. It is part of that triangulation of covenant between church, region, and clergy. And we are all in this relationship, this covenantal relationship together. And the Commission on Ministry is part of the regional arm of that covenant. And we want to be supportive, nurturing arm of that and not an adversarial arm. And we've tried very hard to change that over the years. So I hope that we've done that. And I hope you feel, particularly if you've been before the Commission on Ministry, I hope you feel that it was a supportive and positive experience for you. All right. You have listened to me talk way too much. So are there questions, comments, agreements, disagreements that anyone has in our final few minutes?
David. Horace Williams.
Yes, Horace.
I heard Courtney say she was gonna start record. Can we get tonight's presentation?
I assume so. Valerie's shaking her head, so I think that could probably happen. And I'm not sure how the Jamie Haddocks with the education group that has put all this together. I'm not sure if they're going to be available individually or if they'll package them together, but I'm sure you'll hear something coming out about that later that they would be available since they're recorded.
Okay.
Anyone else? Y'all are way too easy. Well, I hope our time has been helpful. I hope it's
I've got
been
a question that someone
Yeah.
surfaced. Do we commission folks for regional ministries? Is that something that we have done or can do?
Again, they are to be sponsored by a local congregation. And if they're commissioned, then there has to be a job description. If we follow the commissioning track, the local congregation is the source. And so it has to be sponsored through a local church and have a job description. And then they are subject to renewal of that commissioning and they're subject to the standing procedure. So yes, they can be commissioned to regional ministry, but it is sponsored through the local congregation.
Hello, I have a question.
Yeah, Michelle.
Hi, the races and injustice class, has it been scheduled for 2023?
The racism and boundaries.
I can put the dates for those.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, right. Actually, racism was the first one was just this past weekend. The next one is coming up later this fall. There's a boundaries course going to be in Greenville coming up. I don't have the date in front of me, but there's one in Greenville and then there's going to be one in Wilmington in the fall. So Bailey, can you see that Michelle gets a copy of those dates or?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put them in the chat now.
Okay. And I'm gonna put my email in the chat. And so if anybody wants to email me with other questions, I'm happy to answer those. And I'm sure Bailey could answer those also. So yeah, the racial equity is in Wilson in October. Have you got the dates for boundaries? Okay. And my email is there, so feel free to email me. I'm the convener of the boundaries training. And so if you sign up for the boundaries in Greenville and Wilmington, you'll get to see me again.
David, the next racial equity training is going to be October 12 and 13 at First Christian Church at the regional office in Wilson.
Okay.
So the 12th and 13th, that's the next one in the fall.
Okay. Thank you. I hope the time has been productive. I really meant to leave a little more time for questions, but there's a lot of information here. And again, if you have further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer those or reach out to Bailey. She is the current chair, so in workings and details, she may know those better, but in some of the history and the practices, I can also help you with that. So thank you for your attention. I have enjoyed being with you, and I'll turn it back to Courtney.
Bishop Melvin, do you have anything to say before we say goodnight?
What a joy for me to be able to skate in here and hear David Mallory and Bailey Smith waxing eloquently about commissional ministry. David sounds like he wrote the history book on COM. So thank you all so much. And I pray that each one of you that are here tonight, thank you for joining us for the very first Mindful Monday of 2023. And I hope that this has been helpful. And David, I will ask Jamie to go ahead and release this video as quickly as possible this week so that people can and share it with the entire region. And then it will land on the website so people can visit it anytime. Thank you all so much. This was amazing. Bailey and David, thank you.
I second that. I second what Bishop Melvin says. Thank you to David and to Bailey as well. Thank you. Thank each one of you for joining us this evening. It was nice to step in for Jamie. She had a board meeting she had to go to. So I had the pleasure of stepping in for Bailey. It's a joy for me to get to hear David speak about, anything. So it was nice to be with you guys this evening. Check the website, check Facebook. It'll give you the date for the next Mindful Monday. Is it next Monday, Bishop Melvin?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Mindful. Now you put me on the spot.
Sorry.
It is.
Yes,
Yeah, it is.
it is. It is. It's next Monday evening at 7 p.m. Please let me announce while I am here that today, Lisa did release an announcement. It is time for the clergy of this region, all commissioned and all ordained clergy, to sit with the regional minister for an hour of visioning and prayer for this whole year. And so I'm asking every clergy person to meet me on the 31st of January for 1 hour from 7 until 8. I know we're in Mindful Mondays on Monday, but if you would give me Tuesday just 1 hour and for us to share some important information with you, and then we will move forward. So thank you, Courtney.
No, you're welcome. Thank you all and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Courtney, can you leave this open just a minute?
Of course.
Thank you. Good to
Can I
see
turn the-
everyone. Thank you all.
David, can I turn the recording off?
Yes, do.
Okay.